Thank you very much. I almost didn't recognize myself in all of that. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, too, for listening in English. If I tried to do this in Spanish, we'd be here for a long time. I'm going to be talking about language today. Not language of English and Spanish, but a language of learning. How we can empower our children with words. The words of learning. This is my first time to Argentina, so I arrived a little bit early so that I could have a look around. And I stayed in downtown Buenos Aires on Thursday and had a look around yesterday. I had a car that came to collect me from the airport and took me into the city. I don't speak any Spanish. The driver didn't speak any English. And we were together for an hour. Driving in Argentina is very different to driving in England. You drive very close to each other. All the way, he had the window down and he was pointing at Congreso, Congreso. Like, oh, car! So, takes some getting used to. But I was lucky enough, I went out on a boat onto the Delta, and I was shown around. It was a very cold day to be out on the water. But while we were out, I saw Sarmiento's house, the father of the classroom, I think it translates as. And as you go past, there was a sign next to it, which talks about how today we need to start preparing our children. Tomorrow's too late. I thought, wow. When we think about this conference and we're talking about learning by design, that's really learning by design. To me, learning by design means to take deliberate actions, to plan, to not leave it to chance. And I really like that quote that Doug started with this morning, that children have a right to a great teacher, not by chance, not by luck, but by design. And that's about how we plan our time. What should we focus on? What will help our children the most? About 10, 12 years ago, I got really interested in some research in the UK at the time that showed that the number of children dropping out of university in the first year was higher than it had ever been since 1850 or something like that. Hundreds of years. And we were getting feedback from the workplace that school leavers would start a new job and would very quickly find that when they were faced with a problem to solve or they needed to take initiative, they would step back and give up and ask someone else to come in and do it for them. Dropout rates at university were high. The workplace was struggling with a workforce. And it seemed to be about perseverance, about independence. So I got really interested in this idea of how do we help children through schooling to become more independent as learners, to understand this world that they'll live in, and have the skills they need to succeed at whatever level. And what we've found by working with schools over 3 to 5 year projects is that the most effective places, those that help children the most, encourage thinking. They support that idea of a growth mindset Roseanne mentioned earlier, that we believe we can and that we won't give up, and crucially, that we'll try new ways to succeed. And by creating a shared language for learning. And by that language for learning, I'm talking about the words that we need to understand the learning process. If we think of learning as a subject, every subject has its own language. If you're studying rivers, you will learn the words delta, meander, erosion, deposition. These are words connected to rivers. Learning is a bit like a subject. It's a process. It's something children are there to do every day. And it has its own language. It has its own words. Sharing those words with children, giving children that voice, empowers them. Empowers them to make decisions, not just in the short term, but in the long term. So it's a focus on how we learn. This session in the afternoon is often called the graveyard shift. This is the one where you've all had a nice big dinner and a nice bit of chat with your friends, and you come back into the room and you get comfortable and think, oh, I could just doze off. So to stop you from falling asleep, I'm going to make sure through the session I give you lots of time to talk to each other, to talk to the person next to you. So I'll give you a chance to enter a dialogue with one another and share your thinking. So you might want to just have a quick check on both sides of you now at the person you're sitting next to. Are you happy with who you've chosen as your partner? There's a few spare chairs if you need to move. Because what we're going to look at is language as dialogue, not just talk. It's not talk for the sake of talk. It's purposeful. It's designed. It's planned talk. It's a language of learning that helps children to become more capable thinkers, better able to solve problems, to communicate their ideas, to reason and share opinions. Dialogue is not just talk. It's focused language for learning. And Robin Alexander, I thought, really nailed it when he talked about what's the focus in the classroom. That actually maybe it's far more important that we get the students talking than have the teacher talking. So with that idea in mind, I'm going to ask you to talk to that person next to you. I'm going to give you a simple challenge. Have a look at these three. Which one is the odd one out, and why? Which one's different, and why? You've got 30 seconds with the person next to you. Just a few seconds left. And 3, 2, 1. If I can stop you there, please. There's still some pointing while we're working out which one it is. Just show of hands. Did anybody make this one the odd one out? Who made this one the odd one out? Just shout out, why might that one be the odd one out? It's yellow, thank you very much. Well done. Did anybody make that one the odd one out for a different reason? You wear it at work. That's a tough school you work in, but yeah, okay. You can wear this one at work. So it's yellow, you wear it at work. Did anybody make that the odd one out for a different reason? Color, the material is different, so it's a hard hat. What about this one? Did anybody make this one the odd one out? These people sound confident. Yes, I got the right hat. Oh. Why might this one be the odd one out? It's not got a peak on the front. It doesn't have a strap, I heard. Anything else? It's just for fashion over here. That's what we wear it for over here. It's just for fashion. What about this one up at the top? Could anybody make that one the odd one out? There's a few people going, maybe, I suppose. Why might that one be the odd one out? It's got a chin strap. It's for sports. It's for recreation only. So actually, across the group, we've managed to make each one the odd one out for a different reason. Now, in a classroom, hopefully I'd have less students than this in my classroom, but if we did, we'd take those ideas and I would start writing down all of your ideas. Collect that language. Yellow, it's for work, it's for sport, it's got a chin strap, it's fashion, it's soft material. I can collect all that language. We'll push our children again. Have a look at these three. I say have a look at these three. There we are. Have a look at these three. Same thing. Which is the odd one out and why? But this time, can you make each one the odd one out for a different reason? 30 seconds with the person next to you. Make each one the odd one out for a different reason. Just a few seconds left. And 3, 2, 1. If I can stop you there again, please. Just a show of hands this time. Who managed to make all three the odd one out for different reasons? Oh, lots of people. Yeah, you all managed to. Who'd have thought hats could make you think so much? Again, if this was the class, I could collect in lots of different ideas. Who made this one the odd one out? And we could add it to our list. So we build that language. We could even, if we were going to go on and had all afternoon, we could show another three and do the same thing. I'm not going to give you another three to do, though, this time. We could keep collecting those words in from the students. And then I might want to use their words to help with the next part of the lesson. This chap needs a hat. You can see why. He's starting to get a bit like me. He needs a hat. If we had a look through that list of words that we came up with in the last activity, we can ask the students to choose 3 words that would help them to design a hat. Which 3 words will they choose and why? Well, maybe they'd want a soft hat to keep him warm. Maybe they want a chin strap so it doesn't blow away in the wind in Buenos Aires. Maybe he needs it to keep warm. Maybe he wants it to be a fashion accessory, so he's going to put a nice badge on it. The children can choose their own words from the list that they created. Recently, I was working with a teacher in an art lesson, and she was teaching the art lesson to some 14 and 15-year-old students. She'd done a course, a bit like this one. She'd seen the activity with the hats and thought, I could use that in art. She was doing a still life project. What she'd usually done in the past was to put out a bowl of fruit on the table in the middle. All of the students would sit around and they would all do the same painting of the bowl of fruit. Pretty much to her design. Instead, she gave them an odd one out. Which of these 3 is the odd one out and why? And they said, oh, this is the odd one out because it has a dark background. These have a light background. This is the odd one out because it only has one item. That's the odd one out because you can see the brush strokes. This is the odd one out because it looks realistic. This one's the odd one out because it looks old, and so on. She collected the students' words. It's got a dark background. You can see the brush marks. It's light. She showed another 3 and added to their words. At the end of that, she said, you're going to design your own still life. Choose 3 words from that list that would help you to design the still life. So students chose, it's got a dark background, 1 item, you can see the brush marks in it. All the way through the project, she kept tracking their work. Oh, you said here you were going to have a dark background, but you've got quite a light background. Why did you do that? And the student would explain, well, the item at the front was quite dark, so I thought if I put a light background, it'll stand out more. So they were reasoning through the choices that they were making in their art. They were thinking independently about their artwork. They were able to give each other feedback. And it started with their own words. Now, I picked that art example because I was in the room at the time and I saw the teacher doing it, but we also had an inspector in the room as well. And in the UK, we're very keen on inspectors coming into our classrooms and telling us what a great job we're doing. Not really. But there was an inspector in the room, and the inspector was in the room for around 10 minutes. In the 10 minutes, he saw the odd one out, just as you did it with the hat. He saw the odd one out. He saw them make their choices, and he saw them get started with their work, and then he left the room. He came back in the lunch break, and he said to the teacher that he thought that was an excellent lesson with some outstanding features. Really good session, some excellent features. Just give you 30 seconds with the person next to you. You've had a go at an odd one out, and you've heard about that one. What are the features that you like about it? What are the excellent features in that short session? Take 30 seconds with the person next to you. What do you think the inspector liked? Just a few seconds left again. And 3, 2, 1. If I can stop you there again, please. When we look at good teaching and learning, actually good teaching and learning and what constitutes good teaching and learning hasn't really changed for a long time, hundreds of years, in fact. But actually the same components make up good teaching and learning. It typically falls under these 6 themes. The best learning opportunities, the best lessons are active, meaningful, challenging, collaborative, mediated, and reflective. What I mean by each of those, active, where the students get a chance to explore their own ideas. Meaningful, the students can make connections in their learning, which makes it more engaging. Challenging, so the students have to think. It's collaborative, where the students have to work together, share their thinking, their reasons, and their ideas. It's mediated, that's to do with the teacher's role. Rather than just giving information, the teacher guides, prompts, questions, rather than giving the answer. And it's reflective. The students get a chance to think about their learning and how they learnt it. In all of those, starting with that idea about being active, we're not just passive, we're not just sitting and listening, but we're actively involved in the learning. And right from that one down, all of these are about giving ownership to the students. It's not focused in on the teacher. To do that, the students need a language to be able to share ideas with each other. We need to set an expectation that they can do that and create an opportunity for them to do it, so that the language can come from them. Just go back to the odd one out activity. Have a think about that activity that you did with the hats. Can you connect that activity to the 6 themes? Was the odd one out activity active? Did you make connections? Just give you a few seconds with the person next to you. Can you connect the odd one out to those 6 themes? If so, when? And 3, 2, 1. Stop you there again. Did you manage to make some connections? Picking up on David's idea about only connecting in our learning. I just want to pick up on one of those. You've probably managed to connect a lot of those to the odd one out activity. Short, simple, easy activity to do in a classroom with students, helping them to create a language to develop their learning and their thinking. But I want to pick up on the reflective idea. Reflective, you often think of as happening at the end. It's the last thing. In fact, even on that list, it comes at the last item. But actually, reflection doesn't just happen at the end. We reflect all of the time. In an odd one out activity, when you hear somebody else's idea, you reflect. Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. Oh, I hadn't picked that one as the odd one out. I could, and it gives you a different idea. Giving students the space and the time to reflect helps them to develop their understanding and their learning better. I've got 2 children. Boys, they're now 14 and 12, but when they were little, I used to read Winnie the Pooh to them. And I was reading Winnie the Pooh to them, and this really stuck with me. I was teaching at the time, and this section, bump, bump, bump. Here is Edward Bear coming down the stairs now on the back of his head. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. And I did wonder then, how much is learning like that for our children? How much do our children bump, bump, bump through the school day? So they come into our lesson and they get themselves organized and sat down, and we say, in this lesson you're going to learn this, and we're going to do this bit, and you try this out. And we get to the end of the lesson, oh, and don't forget, you've got homework to do for tonight, write it, and you're, okay, I've got my homework, and out they go, and they go into the next lesson. And in this lesson, you're learning this, and you're going to do this, and here's your next part. Before you go, here's your homework, write it down, out you go. Then they go to break, and they talk to all of their friends, and they arrange to meet up later that evening, and they go back to the next lesson. Here's what you're learning, this is what you're going to do, don't forget your homework at the end, and out they go for lunch. At the end of the day, they go to football club, they go to grandma's house, all of these different things happening, and then they come in the next day and start all over again. Bump, bump, bump. How often do our children get to stop bumping and think, what have I learned? What do I know now that I didn't know before? What can I do now that I couldn't do before? So that when they walk out of the door of the classroom, they walk out with a clear idea of what their learning was. They can see the progress they've made. And they've got a language to say, I have learnt this, or I still need to do this. I still need to find out this. when we give children time and space to reflect, it's far more powerful for their learning, in the classroom as well as at the end. So take that time in the lesson, as you've been doing here, just to say, talk to the person next to you about what you understood. If you talk for 3 minutes, give them 30 seconds to talk to each other. For every 3 minutes, give them another 30 seconds to tell the person next to them what they learned. They take all of your ideas, all of that learning, everything they've read in the book, and they put it into their own language. The person next to them will no doubt have understood it completely differently. Share what they understood that's the same and that's different, because there's another opportunity for learning then. But they need the time and the space to do it. I'm going to give you some space to have a think about this one. Just reflect. Think about the students that you teach. If you teach in a kindergarten, before they go to primary school, what do you want the students to be? If you teach in a primary school, when they come to the end of primary school, before they go to secondary, what would you like your students to be? At the end of secondary school, what would you like your students to be? With the person next to you, just complete that sentence. When a student leaves my school, I would like them to be what? And don't just say gone forever. That's not the answer we're looking for. What would you want them to be? Give you 1 minute with the person next to you.
You can use in this screen.
Great. Thank you. And 3, 2, 1. If I can stop you there again, please. For anyone who's a leader in a school here, that's a really useful activity to do with your staff. As a school, what do we want our students to be like when they leave our school? Do that with your staff. Create a shared language about what we want for our students. Here's some typical responses, the sort of things that a lot of schools would say. Those look familiar? Did you say some similar ones in your group? We want them to be happy, keen to keep learning, grateful, as somebody said. We expect gifts. We want them to be problem solvers, well-rounded. Sounds like a good aspiration for a school. This is what we want for our students. So the next question is, if this is what we want, do we provide the opportunities for it to happen? What do we do deliberately? What do we do by design to turn our students into this? What do we deliberately do to make our students confident, happy, willing to have a go, to persevere? Or do we leave it to chance? For me, when I started looking at this learning, how we want our students to develop, this model, the ASK model, really helped me to get a sense of what I'm aiming for with children. And the ASK model, it's education, we have to have acronyms, don't we? Attitudes, skills, and knowledge. Can't go far without those. In any learning situation that we're in, whenever we come to a learning situation, we bring with us a set of attitudes, skills, and knowledge. They're already there in us. So when you came into this session today, you already knew something. But you already came in with some skills too. Skills of listening, note-taking, talking to one another and communicating. And you came in with attitudes too, about being open-minded, interested, curious, resilient. Perhaps if you find English difficult, brave. You came in with a set of attitudes. And all three of those are strongly connected to each other. You can't separate them out. The three go hand in hand. To learn new knowledge, we need skills. To apply those skills, we have to have the right attitude. When those skills become difficult, we need the right attitude to carry on. If we have it, we learn new knowledge. The three are connected. They influence each other. In the last school that I worked in when I was teaching, there was a lady, a lovely lady that I worked with. She was a teacher. We'd known each other for a long time. We were very good friends, and she was the nicest, kindest, most generous person you could ever imagine. Until we went to a staff meeting. And as soon as she went into a staff meeting, she changed. She became a different person. Dragon lady emerged. Now, when I was teaching, I also did this job, so I was going around other schools as well. So when we had a staff meeting, anytime we had somebody in to give a talk or to share ideas with, I thought, great, I'm going to sit, I can make some notes, I can steal some ideas, and I can share them with others. Brilliant. So I'm sitting there with my pad ready. Come on, give me some good ideas. Dragon lady came into the room. She would always sit in the chair nearest to the door. That was her chair. Doesn't matter what time of year it was, she kept her coat on. Middle of summer, 30 degrees outside. Maybe I'm being a bit wishful thinking there in Edinburgh, but keeps her coat on, sit down by the door, folded her arms, and the only contribution she made to any staff meeting was to go, the difference in the attitudes that we came in with, which one of us is more likely to learn? Which one of us is more likely to persevere, to try, to listen intently, to change and make a plan, to take in new knowledge and information? When you come in with that attitude, it directly affects the skills and the knowledge that you'll get. And the same happens for our children. If we picture two children coming into school. Student A wakes up in the morning and he gets in his uniform, is all there ready, laid out on the chair in his bedroom for him, neatly ironed, and he puts it on, and he comes downstairs and Mum is at the breakfast table, pours him some orange juice. Dad's reading the paper and he shares some news with his son. And then they say, "Oh, son, the bus is coming. You don't want to be late, you'd better go. Oh, your sports kit's by the front door. Pick it up on your way out. Don't be late, son. Have a great day. I love you. Bye." Just like my house in the morning, that is. It's peaceful, calm. Student B wakes up in the morning, gets out of bed, picks up the same clothes he was wearing yesterday. He puts them on and he goes downstairs. There's nothing for breakfast. Mum and Dad have already left for work. He has to get his baby brother up. His brother's still asleep upstairs. He finds some clothes for him to wear, and he takes some money out of his mum's purse. On the way into school, they stop at a shop, and they buy a can of Coke and a Mars bar, and they share that. They arrive at school late. He drops his brother off and carries on to his school. He arrives very late. When he arrives, he gets told off and has to sign the book to come in. And he arrives at the class late, and he gets told off, and he's made to sit down. If student A and student B sit next to each other in that class, which one's ready to take in new knowledge and information? Which one's ready for listening? Which one's ready for learning? It's kind of quite obvious in a way. Those attitudes and the skills that we come in with affect our abilities. Now, I'm using that example specifically because what we often do in schools is our intentional purpose, our plan, our design, is focused very much on the K corner, knowledge. We tend to plan for knowledge. We teach stuff, information. We can often share it, as I'm sharing it with you now, talking. So the key skill is listening, interpreting, and note-taking. Now, if you're student A and you're ready for that, you do well. And so student A has the answer ready when the teacher asks, gives the right answer and gets a pat on the back. Well done, student A, you knew the answer. But when we start thinking about the attitudes and the skills that we might need in learning, if we shift the focus away from the K corner. In any lesson, there's always going to be knowledge. We'll be learning it. But what if I plan to help students develop their skills of reasoning, problem solving? What if I deliberately set out to help students become more resilient? The opportunity I need to provide for them is challenge. You don't become more resilient by avoiding challenge. You need to face challenge. So if I set my classroom up with a challenge, you have a problem to solve. When we think about our two students, student A and student B, which of those two is more used to dealing with challenge? Which is more used to solving problems? And when we shift the opportunities in the classroom from taking in knowledge and information to active problem solving and challenge, we provide more opportunities for more students. Student A actually starts to find it quite difficult because student A puts his hand up and gives an answer to the challenge, and you say, that's interesting, but what about? And student A thinks, hang on, I gave you an answer. You're meant to say, well done, and pat me on the head. When they don't get that kind of affirmation, they struggle. And that's part of the issue that universities have had. Students who've done very well in exams go along to university and are suddenly asked not only to go and research on their own, but to think of their own question and come up with their own conclusion. Have we given them the skills that they need to be able to do that? When they get into the workplace and they're faced with a problem to solve, have they learned how to take initiative, how to try something and persevere? Now, I'm not suggesting in this that knowledge isn't important. We need knowledge. But it's part of an equal triangle. Knowledge is linked and cannot be separated from attitudes and skills. So we need to develop all three. I'm just going to give you a minute with the person next to you to talk about that model. What do you understand by that? How does that connect to your school? Make some links. If you want to, because I know it's after lunch and you're probably feeling a little bit sleepy now, talk to the person next to you and stand up while you do it. Stand up onto your feet, talk to the person next to you about that model. Make some connections to your own school. Just a few seconds left. And 3, 2, 1. If I can interrupt you there, please. and ask you to take your seats again. Some research recently in New Zealand and Australia pointed out that sitting is the new smoking. We spend too long sitting down and it's bad for our health. Did you manage to make some connections? One of the things that is really important about this model, when we think about opportunities, comes back to the idea of language. What happens in most schools that I work with, most of the schools that I see and most of the teachers that I talk to, is that we tend to plan deliberately for the K corner. We plan that one out, we even write it down and we have learning intentions for it and we share it with the students. When it comes to skills, depending on the subject that you teach, but often skills becomes the way we organize. So I'm going to teach them this, but actually I'd like them to work together and collaborate on it, so that'll develop social skills. They'll need to listen to one another and compromise. And then the attitudes, we say, well, if they're all working together and they're all compromising, then surely that's helping to make them more confident. We tend to plan for the knowledge, organize around skills, and if we're honest, hope for the best with the attitudes. But if we come back to the idea of not leaving it to chance, none of that is a criticism in any way at all. There's a very good reason why we do it. We do it because we've got a language to talk about knowledge. We share a language with each other, and we share a language with the students about the knowledge. It's there in the textbooks. It's there in the curriculum. All the words we need to talk about rivers, to talk about our maths, all the language is there. So we can put it in our learning intentions. We can test for it easily. We can measure it. We've got a shared language. When it comes to skills, depending on subject again, we get a little bit looser with the language. Is that really a skill or is that knowledge? I'm not sure. Do we have a learning intention about the skill that we want students to develop? Much less common. Attitudes? Finding a language to describe attitudes can be very hard. Think about some of the report cards you might have written for students. I'm thinking back to report cards that were written about me when I was at school. If he improves his attitude, he will do well in this class. I don't know how many times I read that for how many years. If I improve my attitude, I will do better in school. What does that mean? Which attitude? Tomorrow, if I come in happy, confident, ta-ta-da, yeah, I can learn. We can't switch our attitudes on overnight. It's a bit like writing, if he had more knowledge, he would do better. Of course. So what are my opportunities to get more confident, to be more happy? You remember that list when I said, when a student leaves your school, I would like them to be? How many of the things in that list were attitudes and skills? Happy, confident, problem solvers. Willing to have a go, give things a try. We want our students to have the attitudes and skills to succeed, but we don't always have a language to talk about it. And we don't always have a language to share with the students. So they find that difficult as well. So if we want to try and get a bit of a balance in there, it's not about always being right in the middle of that triangle and being equal. Sometimes we have to focus on knowledge. Start of a project. What do you already know? What do we need to know? What are we going to be finding out? What's the key terminology? But at other times, how confident do we feel about that knowledge? Are you happy with the answer that you've given? What would make you feel more satisfied with that answer? And at other times, we will be teaching knowledge. It'll be there. But perhaps our intention should be to develop the attitudes and skills. Develop the skills you need for research, for reasoning, for giving opinions, for drawing conclusions. and develop the attitudes of perseverance and resilience. I want to think about a skill. Thinking is a skill. So I'm going to ask you, thinking about the session today, thinking about the whole day if you like, what kind of thinking have you been doing? So what type of thinking have you been doing today? With the person next to you, can you write down 5 types of thinking you've done since the start of the day? So for example, you've been comparing ideas with each other. That's mine, you can't have that one. You need to come up with your own. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, that's all, to write down 5 types of thinking you've used since the start of today. Ten seconds left. And 3, 2, 1. I'm going to stop you there, please. Can tell it's cold in here from how blue the people went on the screen there. So I asked you what types of thinking that you'd been using since the start of today. I'm going to ask you to be honest now, be completely honest. Just raise your hand if you found that quite difficult to do. Who found that quite difficult? Yeah? Thank you for being honest. I'm not going to pick on you. Put your hands down again now. Actually, I can tell that you found that difficult. I could tell just from watching you doing that one a few minutes that some of you found that very difficult. You all started out quite well. So everybody said, write down your types of thinking. Oh, okay, there we go. Yeah, we got that one. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, got that one there. And then you could see there was a bit of a, put this one down. Is that a type of thinking? Yeah. Put it down. He's not going to check. He won't know. You having a nice weekend? Yeah. It's quite hard, isn't it? And the reason that was quite difficult, the reason you got a couple quite quickly and then sort of tailed off a little bit and found it hard, is because we haven't shared a language to talk about thinking yet. We haven't created that language together. Some of you might, I know I was talking to a school today who've developed thinking skills in their school. I imagine they've developed a language for that. But for a lot of us, and certainly for our students, we haven't developed a language to talk about thinking. And if we want students to get better at thinking, then they probably need some words to understand what it is they're getting better at. Here's a few examples. I could probably have gone on and on and on. There are hundreds more. And everybody's now going, oh, I didn't know that was one. Oh, if I could have had that, I can finish my list now. And you know what? A lot of these words are really familiar from things like exams, assignments. We see these words all the time, don't we? Evaluate, analyze, describe, explain. These are all skills that we can get better at. One of the really interesting things for students, and doing this with students, is how often we use these words and don't explain them to the children. So I'd like you to describe this in your books. I'd like you to explain this in your books. What's the difference between describe and explain? How many students could tell us that? Analyze the blah, 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 blah. Evaluate the blah, 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 blah. How many students could tell us what the difference is between analyze and evaluate? How many of us could explain the difference between analyze and evaluate? It's a difficult language. But actually, if that's what we want our students to be able to do, to reason, to experiment, to be curious, we not only need to give them the opportunity to develop them, but we also need to give them the language to recognize when they're doing it and when they're getting better at it. Because if we don't have the language to describe it, we can't get into that world. Language is our access to learning. Without it, we can't enter the world. The session that I've had now was a little bit short. We started a little bit later, so it was a little bit shorter than the advertised amount. I've got a few examples on the slides of things that different schools have done to share a language with the children. I will be leaving all of those slides with Silvana to share with all of you. I'll create a link to that so you've got all of the slides. And I will also leave in the examples from classrooms that people have tried to share that language. So if you want to start sharing that language with the children, you've got some ideas to get you started. Thank you very much for listening.